Good evening, monster children, and welcome to the Kaiju Krypt. I am your host, Vinnie Kami. Tonight is the night you mortals join the ranks of the yokai.
A far more inviting community than the Kami. Just throwing that out there. Just throwing it out.
We are not having this conversation, Kappa Joe. Monster Island's yokai community is quickly becoming one of the most prosperous in Japan, thanks to your kind's generous employers.
Yeah, you know, the humans do pay great. You know how many cucumbers I get from them? You know how many the board gives me? 500. Yeah, that's right. 500 a week from the island's board. 500. Pretty impressive.
You work for me.
Ha, yeah, sure. You might want to check that contract you signed. Capiche?
What? These mortals dare? You have until the end of the show to prove this.
Yeah, sure, boss. I'll start digging through the files right now. I'm actually happy to do it, you know? Most of the time I'm not happy to do it. You order me around, I have to go through things, but this time it's fine. You know what? You do your show, I'll be over here, I'm going to take care of it. It's fine. Just dig through these files. I'm going to dig through your files, I'll tell you what.
That will keep the fool busy. As I was saying, monster children, tonight you all but tear the veil between the mortal world and the spirit realm. Some of you disguise yourselves with costumes to hide from yokai, both mischievous and malevolent, while others wear costumes to join in the revelry. Human or monster? What's the difference? Such a question is asked in tonight's story, an excerpt from one of the most famous kaiju tales of all time. I speak, of course, of King Kong, by Delos W. Lovelace. Novelization of the immortal film published in December 27th, 1932, 3 months before the film was released. So, it was in a book, not a film, that the world was introduced to the eighth wonder of the world. To make a long story short, because the copyright to this novelization was never renewed, it has fallen into public domain like a death god's forgotten journal, which you mortals have exploited just so much. So many pretenders to Kong's throne. Worse still, Kong now belongs to everyone and no one. At least, until the original film suffers the same fate in a few short years. But this evening, we will hear Chapter 9 of this book, wherein Beauty meets the Beast when she is offered as a sacrifice to him. A classic scene. Our reader is a man from that time. So he says, the founder of the Monster Island Legal Action Team, Raymund Martin. And now, without further ado, monster children, relive the world's first meeting with the original king of the monsters.
Salutations, all you kaiju kids! I wouldn't normally leave the Legal Action Team office, but when my paralegal Gary told me I received an electronical letter asking me to read a book on the radio wave, and one that I saw on the shelf at the local bookstore in my hometown of Kenosha, Wisconsin to boot, I couldn't resist. But, more importantly, I received it as a late Christmas gift in 1932 from my secretary Isabella. She was a lovely dame with legs up to here, and wanted desperately for me to marry her. Or so I was told in her letter of resignation 6 months later. She'd hoped this Beauty and the Beast adventure would be a subtle hint of her romantic interest. I assume she meant I was the Beast. As a lawyer, I'm always under oath, and so the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God, and, well, I've only hired married secretaries since, and made the law my one true love. But sometimes think about how I tried in the early 1960s to keep that book from falling into public domain. But did Grosset and Dunlap, or Mr. Lovelace, or Mr. Cooper listen to me? No, sirree, Bob. I had half a mind to buy the rights myself. I could have retired on that. But I love the law too much. So alas, I missed my opportunity. Now I've just made it a pet project to unravel the Gordian knot of legal issues surrounding the King Kong copyright. Let's try and say that 3 times fast. It'll be the subject of my next law book, Gorilla by Nightmares, The Legal History of King Kong. The final chapter may end up being the story of me representing that big ape in the world's first kaiju divorce case. Things are rockier than ever between him and Lady Kong, let me tell you. But that's a story for another day. So, I do love the sound and smell of paper books. All you kiddies with your computerized notepads don't know what you're missing. Anyway, I have a bookmark right here. King Kong by Delos W. Lovelace. Chapter 9. Hot, native hands thrust Anne down to the bottom of the silently racing dugout. One was pressed over her mouth, and though she twisted wildly, she could send no cry back through the darkness to the wanderer. No single cry had been permitted from her the first instant of capture. Hot, pressing hands had bound and gagged her always. Her mouth had felt them at first as she stepped onto the narrow black aisle beside the deckhouse. And mouth, arms, and legs had been clamped as she was passed from hand to other hand down the ship's side. Anne was afraid in a way she had never imagined. No book she'd ever read, no story she'd ever been told could equal the terror which swept her in increasing waves. It was a terror which made her feel that every inch of her insulated body was alive with unmentionable things. It went beyond the midnight horrors of childhood. It went beyond the horrors of dreams. Her single, conscious thought was to cry out for help. But she told herself despairingly that even if the hand lifted from her mouth, it would do no good. Her throat, she knew, would refuse to give forth utterance. Her legs, released at last, did indeed refuse to act. When the dugout grated ashore and her captors jerked her to her feet on the beach, she could not stand. Wasting no time, 2 bulky shadows swung her to their shoulders and raced off through the darkness toward the village. Several times in the course of the flight, the bearers were changed. This always followed a high-pitched command. And the 3rd time she heard it, Anne's heart leaped at the realization that the speaker was the witch doctor. The ceremonial court before the wall's great gate was bright with torches. The tribe was massed here, just as it had been massed in the afternoon. The same ordered rows lined either side of the skin-covered bridal dais. The same black gorilla men occupied the 2 front ranks. The king had taken his same aloof stand, clad in the same magnificence of feathers, grass, and fur. And the witch doctor, leaving Anne's bearers to stand guard where she had been put down, promptly took his own proper position. The dais, halfway up the broad stone stairs, was empty. Anne's fear-numbed mind, however, failed to see the significance of that. Close by her, a pitying face stood out from the crowd, and Anne vaguely recognized the flower-garlanded girl of the afternoon, dressed now as all the other women were dressed. That meant nothing either. And when, at the witch doctor's signal, she was picked up and borne up to the dais, she sat there in an uncomprehending stupor. Nervous haste had pulsed behind the command which put Anne in her place. The witch doctor had belaboured his paddlers all the way back from the Wanderer. He had forced Anne's bearers to their highest speed on the race to the village. Now he was even more swift to set the ceremony going. Anne realized dimly that so much haste was due to a conviction that rescuers would be quick in pursuit. But the realization aroused no hope. She had been totally without hope from the moment her first cry had been stifled. She had had her own inescapable conviction that the mystery of this ancient island had trapped her, and that no rescue was possible. At a signal, the massed natives began a familiar chant. Their serried ranks swayed in the torchlight in a hypnotic rhythm. The witch doctor advanced to the dais and once more performed his oddly supplicating dance. Once more the gorilla men leaped out from the chanting host. And now, as in the afternoon, another signal brought the king into the ceremony. He stepped forward, and at his commanding arm 10 warriors rushed at the 2 smoothly trimmed half-logs which held the great gate shut. "Nadesi!" Anne needed no knowledge of the language to know the king had shouted, "Open." 5 men to each bar, the gate tenders strained and slowly drew the wooden bolts back through the massive, time-pitted iron sockets. With still greater strain, each group began to pull its half of the great gate open. "Nodundo!" the king shouted. Instantly, a warrior who had been standing at the gate's high portal struck a mighty blow against the metal drum suspended above. Briefly aroused by the rolling sound, Anne realized that the signal forecast by Driscoll had been given. It was a signal to others besides whatever bridegroom waited in the wilderness outside the wall. At the blow upon the drum, the chanting ceased. The massed ranks on either side of the dais broke. With cries of mingled excitement and apprehension, the tribesmen and the women, and the children as well, fled to the wall. By frail ladders they scrambled to the top. Once on the lofty ramparts, the tribe resumed its chant, to the accompaniment of swaying torches held so as to cast most of their smoky light beyond the wall. "Tasco!" the king shouted. Now the gods picked Anne up, dais and all, and rushed her through the opening gate. "Watu!" the king shouted. Instantly the gate tenders all but joined the doors of the gate. Only the narrowest gap was left, and then 10 men braced themselves to close even this on the instant of the return of the dais bearers. Indeed, from their grim expressions, it was plain they meant to close the gap, if necessary, before the bearers got back. "Nodundo!" the king shouted, and once again the drummer rolled thunder out of the black wilderness. High on the walls, the tribespeople tipped their torches for a better view. Beyond the wall, a brief plain ran off and lost itself in the darkly shadowed base of the precipice. In this plain, a few rods out, stood a stone altar as ancient as the wall it faced. Its steeply ascending steps were spotted with hoary lichens. Its platform, some dozens of feet above the ground, lay under inches of furry green moss which soaked up the torch's light. 2 worn pillars, splendidly carved, rose out of the platform a short arm's width apart. "Tasco! Tasco!" the king shouted. As his voice leaped through the crack of the gate, Anne's bearers raced her at the redoubled speed up the slippery steps of the altar and swung her into position between the pillars. 2 spread her arms while 2 more tied grass ropes to her wrists, cast loops around the pillars and drew them tight. Anne hung, barely conscious, her eyes closed. "Nodundo!" the king shouted, this time to the drummer on the wall. The man swung his blunt stick again, and the thunder rolled deafeningly. The crowd rampart swayed in an insane chant. Anne's bearers leaped to the ground, and with fearful glances backward, fled. The gate closed upon the heels of the last one, and Anne was alone, without the wall. From the shadowed base of the precipice came a deep, unreal roar, which met the roll of the drum and drew it back against the wall. "Gong!" The watching, torch-illuminated mob on the rampart burst into great cry. "Kong! Kong! Kong!" A sense of impending fate lifted Anne's eyelids. She stared about in bewilderment, uncertain of where she was. She looked at her wrists, and realizing now what hurt her, she struggled erect to lessen the rope's bite. Before her, she became conscious of the crowded wall. Behind her, she was aware of a closer, deeper shout, and of a shadow. She turned her head, and then, while her eyes widened, the shadow split the black cloak of the precipice and became solidly real. Blinking up at the packed wall, its vast mouth roared defiance. Its black-furred hands drummed a black-furred breast in challenge. In the full glare of the torches it hesitated, stopped, and as though reading the meaning of the 1,000 hands which gestured from the rampart, turned and looked down at the altar. And at Anne. It did not look up at Anne upon her pedestal. It looked down. Moving closer, it stared down between the 2 pillars. High upon the wall, the tribespeople caught their breath. Their pointing arms grew motionless. Even the torch flames seemed to cease their wavering, and Anne's scream sped piercingly into the dead silence. Kong jerked back a half-step and rumbled angrily. His great hand, which had been about to touch the curious golden crest revealed by the torches, withdrew. He turned and stared suspiciously up at the wall, but when no further sound came from the crowded natives, and no sound or further movement from the figure now drooping between the pillars, he renewed his investigation. Immediately, he found that he could not pick Anne up, and shortly he found the reason. The ropes, however, offered no difficulty. The loops about the pillar broke in his hands, and he was free to explore the amazing being who drooped across his arm. Shining hair, petaled cheek, tissue garments, puzzling footgear. His fingers discovered endless mystery. In an intensity of preoccupation, he began to rumble to himself as he turned the figure over, this way and that, much in the manner of a half-adult human might turn and inspect a limp, unconscious bird. When the crowd shouted again, he did not even look up. When new voices joined the clamor, he paid no more attention. With a last intent look at the white continents beneath his hand, he shifted Anne's form to the crook of one arm, and started slowly back into the shadow of the precipice. The heavy creak of the opening gate drew no sign from his receding back. And when a challenging figure plunged through and cried loudly, and a shot whistling something past his ear, he only leaped more quickly over the last few yards which separated him from the black, concealing wilderness. This right here is why Kong needs representation from the legal action team. This and that trademark infringement charge from Crazy Bernice for claiming in some promotional material to be as big as a battleship. Ha! Jim Crackers! I love that sound. Reminds me of my time in the U.S. Navy during World War I when...
We need only one old story from you tonight, mortal. And what a story! King Kong is an immortal American myth that changed cinema forever. Oh, the horror, the adventure, the tragedy.
The cucumbers! Oh yeah, see that? I got it right here, and black and white. 500 cucumbers a week from the humans. Take that!
What of it?
What of it? What of it, he says. You know what I'm doing? I'm applying to be a Monsterland performer. Wages plus tips, baby. Oh, yeah.
How dare you breach contract with me?
When the price is right, I will break anything. Like your kneecaps, for instance. You dig?
You dare incur the wrath of a storm god?
Yeah. Thunder and lightning, very, very frightening. Whatever. Take this up with the lawyer who just read the story.
What?
You heard me, Slick. I signed up as a client while he was reading.
No!
Yeah, more like, yeah, at least from my perspective. His paralegal works fast. What can I say?
What do you want?
A raise.
Fine.
Equal or more than what the humans pay, please.
All right.
Bam! Pleasure doing business with you. And, happy Halloween, you mook.
The legal action team will be the end of me. But there you have it, monster children. Yet another Kaiju classic. You can easily find the book in print or online, so seek it out and read the whole story for yourself. It has some minor but key differences that have allowed many Kong films, some better than others, to be made over the years. So until next time, remember why you fear the dark.
The Kaiju Krypt presents King Kong Chapter 9 by Delos W. Lovelace, starring Damon Noyes as Vinnie Kami and Raymund Martin, and Daniel Damana as Kappa Joe. Written, directed, produced, and edited by Nathan Marchand. Music tracks included The Zombies Ate John Carpenter by Terranigma. Sound effects sourced from freesound.org and created by JP Gantz. Our story segments were made possible by the generous MIFE Max members on Patreon, including executive producer Damon Noyes. This is a fan production, and no copyright infringement is intended or implied. All characters, video clips, and audio clips belong to their respective copyright holders. MIFV is a Moonlighting Ninjas media production and a proud member of Pod Nation. Thank you for listening. Happy Halloween!